You're listening to Finn Voices on Healthcare Now Radio, where we highlight and amplify the voices at the forefront of health innovation. Innovation that improves people's lives. Join us for an inside look at the changemakers driving conversation and answering the most important questions in healthcare today.
Welcome to Finn Voices. I'm Beth Friedman, Senior Partner at Finn Partners, and I'm based in Atlanta, Georgia. Today, I'm honored to welcome Bobby Reddy Jr., CEO and co-founder of Prenosis. Prenosis is a precision medicine company for hospitals and health systems. They're dedicated to transforming how we understand and treat patients in acute care. We're going to talk about that on the show today. Their first commercial solution was focused on sepsis. Bobby and his team have now expanded that. So we're going into other areas like acute heart failure and pneumonia. So we'll touch on some of those diseases today. Bobby, it's great to have you here and welcome to Finn Voices.
Thank you so much for the opportunity, Beth. Really excited to be here.
I love to start all my podcasts with just having you tell our audience a little bit about yourself, how you co-founded Prenosis. You've really got a fascinating company that's doing some pretty amazing things for, I'm a former coder, right? So these are some of the most common but most costly and dangerous diseases. And you guys are really focused there. So tell us about how you got into the company, how you co-founded it, and a little bit about what you're doing.
Yeah, absolutely, Beth. So we founded the company as a spin-out out of the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. I was a postdoc working on building a company actually with my co-founder, Rashid Bashir, who is currently the Dean of Engineering at UIUC now. At the time, we'd really thought about starting a company. We didn't really know what the company was going to do. It was obviously something in the healthcare space, but we just wanted to start a company because we wanted to start a company. Over time, that changed, of course. Over the course of the first few years of starting the company, we really pivoted towards addressing a huge problem, which I'm sure we'll get to.
So what year was that?
That was 2014 was when we started the company. We got our first funding in 2016, 2017. Yeah.
Oh, right. Excellent. So congratulations on that. Tell me a little bit about the conditions that you're dealing with here. Let's start there, because I know precision medicine is sort of a broad term in the industry. Actually, I just read an article about it today. A study came out of UPMC, but you're doing something a little bit more specific and different. So can you describe sort of what the difference is in what you guys are doing?
Yeah, absolutely. So continuing the story out of starting the company, about 2 years after we started the company, we had the opportunity to move the company into a small room inside the cancer center at the hospital at Carle Foundation Hospital, which is the main hospital in Champaign. And as part of that process, I actually got a badge that let me into all areas in the hospital. They didn't know this at the time, but the badge actually let me into the ICU, into the lab, into the hospital quarters, into patient rooms, etc. And I took full advantage of that over the course of 1 to 2 years, where I interviewed a lot of doctors, nurses, technicians, patients, and I started to realize that there was a huge problem that still remains unsolved to this day, which is that we don't understand the biology of the most serious conditions in the hospital. We just don't have the right data. We don't have the right understanding of these conditions, whether it's sepsis or acute heart failure or acute kidney injury or pneumonia or stroke, name the top serious conditions in the hospital. We really don't have a deeper biological understanding. There hasn't been a human genome project to study the most serious conditions in the hospital like there has been for oncology. So we realized that this was a huge problem, and we set out to solve that problem about 10 years ago. We started collecting a lot of data. We started collecting a lot of samples. I wouldn't call us, quite at the scale of the Human Genome Project, but we kind of modeled our effort after that. And the goal was really just to deepen our biological understanding of these conditions. And so what we've shown now over thousands upon thousands of samples, over 100,000 samples that we've collected from over 35,000 patients, is that what we thought of previously as single diseases, we thought of maybe of sepsis as a disease or acute heart failure as a disease, actually are made up of many different subtypes of disease. Very similar to how breast cancer was thought of as a singular cancer 20 years ago, but now we know there's many different types of breast cancer, and we treat the different types of breast cancer differently. So similarly, we need to treat sepsis as 8 different types of diseases. And each of those different diseases needs to be treated differently. And so when we talk about precision medicine, that's really what we mean. We mean that the different types of sepsis should be treated differently with different treatments. And it all starts from the data and the understanding that there are different diseases, how to tell those diseases apart from each other.
Sepsis has been a big conversation for many, many years, right? As long as I've been in healthcare. And as I mentioned, between the three that you talked about, the heart failure, pneumonia, and sepsis, it just seems like those are just such a huge amount of our patient volumes and of what we see. And then one thing you pointed out was that we never really dug deep enough, it sounds like, to really understand how these diseases progress and how they may be interrelated with other things.
Absolutely. The way that we diagnose these diseases honestly hasn't changed that much over the past 20 to 30 years. So the way that we characterize those diseases, how we diagnose those diseases in the hospital setting, really hasn't changed over the last 20 to 30 years. We still run the same overall tests, a CBC, a CMP, a lactate. We haven't really changed the diagnostic testing. And more importantly, we really haven't discovered new treatments for these conditions. And so when a patient enters the hospital with sepsis, you more or less just kind of wait and hope that they're going to get better. You treat them with antibiotics, with fluids, but you're not really treating the underlying disease. So you kind of are sitting around hoping they're going to get better, and many of the patients never get better.
Let's take a moment and dive a little bit into what you mentioned, which is the data, and really using data, more robust, bigger data sets, but also using it in different ways than we have thought of in the past. So I know your company brings together sort of the real-time clinical data, biomarkers. Tell us kind of how that works.
Yeah, so we partnered with many different hospitals over the years to build a large biobank, so a collection of samples. As I mentioned, it's actually over 140,000 samples from over 35,000 patients that we've collected over the years. And so we really understand the patient journey over time. So as you can tell from the numbers, it's many samples per patient, because we don't just get the sample when the patient comes in the door. We get the samples following up many days after they're admitted. So we understand the course of the disease in ways that haven't been possible without assembling this type of data. And then from those samples, we actually measure in our lab a lot of different biological parameters called biomarkers that help us characterize more deeply the biology of each patient. And then we combine that data with the vital measurements, the labs, the medications, the comorbidities, the demographic information. All of the information that is normally collected in the hospital gets combined with this deeper biological data to really get a holistic sense of what is going on with these patients. And so that's part of kind of the discovery work that we've done, which is really about knowledge. It's about deeper understanding of the different types of biology that go into quote unquote sepsis or go into acute heart failure. And only from that understanding can you develop new products to tell these different subtypes apart from each other.
And what amazed me when we talked about this first, Bobby, is that it sounds like, from what you just described, it sounds like a very long process, but no. You guys are able to do this very quickly and get that speed to diagnosis and treatment.
Exactly. So the first part of what we do is assembling this biobank and this data set, which took a long time to generate. We generated lots and lots of data. It's kind of like building a map. So we built this large map to better understand these different conditions and how they overlay each other and how they don't overlay each other and the differences and similarities. So we built all of that in a map. But the map is only helpful if it helps guide where you want to go. And that's where the GPS comes into play. So we have kind of a system that we build a map with, but we separately have a system that we call kind of like our GPS, which is able to, in less than an hour, identify which biological subtype these patients have. So that consists of a real-time integration into the hospital's electronic health record, where we can stream data in real time. So we can stream the vitals, we can stream the labs, the notes, the medications, the comorbidities, the demographic information. We can stream all of that data literally in real time. That gets combined with the ability to place a novel analyzer that's able to measure these extra biomarkers in less than 30 minutes. So the workflow is basically the patient comes to the hospital, if they're suspected of having pneumonia or sepsis, then our companion diagnostic test could be ordered. At that point, the data is streamed directly from the EHR, the vitals, the labs, the medications, et cetera. But also the patient's blood is drawn, the blood is sent to the lab, and in less than 30 minutes, these novel biomarkers are measured. All of that data, the vitals, labs, medications, in addition to the novel biomarkers, are sent to the cloud. In the cloud, we run AI algorithms to, in real time, process all of this data and figure out what is the biology of this patient. And then that ultimately ends up in a treatment recommendation. So which type of drug does the patient need? In today's world, that could be an existing drug, for example, like steroids. But in the future, with novel clinical trials, that could be new treatments that don't exist today that Prenosis will bring to the market to treat these conditions much more effectively.
And I think that speed to diagnosis is so important because some of the diseases that we're talking about, they just advance so quickly, right? The patient could go from 0 to 100 in a day or 2 days. So I think that that's really, really important part of what you guys are doing.
Absolutely. That's the big difference between precision medicine in cancer and precision medicine in hospitals, is really that these conditions can move very fast. I don't know if you saw in the news, but Kyle Busch recently was passed from sepsis. And that's an example of this condition moving very quickly. He was actually in a race a couple of days before he died. He was performing at such a high level. And then he succumbed to sepsis a couple of days later. So, you can imagine how quickly that progresses.
Yeah, exactly. I saw that news and I was curious about that. But to your point, sepsis especially advances so quickly. It's pretty scary. I have a personal friend who went in for a routine surgery and turned septic, and now she's missing a few fingers and toes. It's pretty crazy. So, and
it's so sad how fast it moves and how big of an impact it can have.
And I so appreciate everybody that works in this space for these common diseases, but they're common, but they're costly, and they take lives. So the focus is needed. Quick question: it's interesting because you mentioned this earlier. I think big pharma hasn't always paid attention to these common diagnoses. Certainly those of us in the hospital pay attention because we see them every day. But any thoughts about why they haven't? Or what's failed in the past? Like what trials have failed it?
It's largely because of spectacular failures in the field. So many different companies, like Eli Lilly, for example, had a blockbuster drug they developed for septic shock, actually. I think it was approved in 2001, but it was eventually pulled because it worked for some patients and it actually hurt other patients. And so that's been the problem across many hundreds of clinical trials over the last 30 years, is that these trials usually yield mixed results because they work for some patients and they don't work for other patients. And in retrospect, that makes a lot of sense because if there's 8 different types of biology that go into sepsis, maybe biologies 1, 3, and 4 respond to a given drug, but biologies 2, 5, 6, 7, and 8, they don't respond, or maybe the patients are even hurt by the drug. And so very similar to oncology, where you don't try the same oncology drug on all breast cancers, you try the drug on the breast cancers that will respond to the drug. There's a very similar parallel here, where we really need to treat the right patients with the drug. And to your point, the condition of these patients changes so rapidly that a drug that might help a patient on day 0, 1, and 2 might actually hurt the patient on day 5, 6, and 7. So you have to profile the patient, but constantly reprofile the patient to make sure they're in the right zone, the right biological zone, to show that they'll respond to the treatment. But that's largely why big pharma has stayed away from the space. It's almost a bad word when you're talking to investors or big pharma. Saying the word sepsis is almost a bad word because they're so shocked by how little has worked in the field. In addition to that, there's kind of secondary concerns around their ability to make money in the space, which we think that we can address. But fundamentally, the factor that we bring to the table is by treating patients differently, by treating different patients differently so that the right patient is getting the right drug at the right time.
Sort of like understanding each individual's unique biology, making sure then that the treatment that we're delivering addresses that unique biology, not just that disease in general.
Exactly. And the good news for us is that there's a lot of mature compounds out there that where the safety has already been tested, the efficacy has already been tested. They've already been through preclinical, phase 1, phase 2, and sometimes even phase 3 trials. They just haven't been tried on these serious hospital conditions. And so we don't need to start from very early in the drug development process. We don't need to start from a preclinical drug development model. No, we can go straight to the end. And we can run a single phase 3 trial with one of these mature compounds, but just use the compound on the right patient at the right time to very quickly get a lot of different drugs into the market into a space that is largely unaddressed today. So we didn't talk about it too much. We alluded to it a little bit, but largely because Big Pharma is not interested in the space. The space is actually pretty empty. It's kind of crazy. I wake up every morning and I wonder what is going on because it's such a big unmet need.
It's a bit ironic, right? Yeah, it's ironic.
Absolutely. We spend 8 times the amount of total dollars on hospital care compared to all of oncology combined together. And yet there's very little, almost no drug development for hospital conditions, and yet there's so much activity for oncology. So it's a huge unmet need. These are real patients that have real problems that never get returned back to the same quality of life. You mentioned you had a friend who had fingers amputated, and a lot of times these patients never return anywhere close to the same quality of life that they had, if they even survive. And so it's a huge unaddressed need. And then there's so little activity in the space. It's very concerning.
Wow. Well, kudos to you and Prenosis team for focusing in these areas. It sounds like it's desperately needed. I know it from being in the industry, but I also know from personal experience as well. So let's talk about, you talked about Big Pharma. What else can we do either at Prenosis or as an industry to get more attention here, to get more attention on these sort of common diseases that escalate rapidly, take lives, and cost a lot of money?
Yeah, so there's a lot of kind of not-for-profits that focus on increasing awareness. For example, the Sepsis Alliance, I'm on the board of the Sepsis Alliance, actually. They do a lot of great work to increase awareness, and they've made a lot of great progress over the last 10 to 15 years on increasing awareness when it comes to sepsis. And so I think that when these things happen, like when what happens to Kyle Busch happens, which unfortunately is super, super common, it's good to acknowledge and research and understand why did he die and why did similar patients die, and bring awareness and, talk to your congressperson about why there needs to be more funding and more awareness when it comes to sepsis or acute heart failure or acute kidney injury. From the Prenosis side, what we're really trying to do is we're trying to show that these clinical trials actually can succeed. There's been hundreds of trials that failed, but we want to show with this new approach of measuring the biology very deeply, very quickly, in less than an hour, that these clinical trials can be very effective. That they can show very high amount of signal in terms of the mortality benefit, the benefit to improving the condition of the patient. And if we can show that, then we think Big Pharma is going to all of a sudden rear their heads and be like, oh, I need to get into the space again, because it's such a huge unmet need. And Big Pharma is largely driven by unmet need and obviously by the need to generate profits. So it's a huge space with a lot of money in it, a lot of unmet need. And so if somebody goes first and somebody shows that the trials actually can work, then we think Big Pharma is going to be rushing for the space. It'll be the flipped problem where too many pharma companies are going to be working on the space. And where Big Pharma goes, the money tends to go as well.
So when you do the trials, I assume you're working with the hospital's health systems directly.
Yeah, we're working with a network of health systems. It's actually led by Vanderbilt. Vanderbilt is our coordinating site. And when we approach these sites, actually Vanderbilt is approaching the site and saying, hey, if you want to run the trial, we need to integrate the Prenosis platform. And we get a lot of great traction in that way.
I read in that study, I mentioned that study just came out this morning from UPMC. One of the challenges, and I was surprised to hear this, one of the challenges with this model or this type of approach is is getting the patients engaged. I was kind of surprised about that, but do you guys have any, like, have you experienced that in any of your customer sites where it's difficult to get the patients to participate?
It really depends on the site
Okay.
and the patient. There's a lot of heterogeneity in that
Mhm.
on that front, but it really comes down to the right education. So telling the patient that, hey, if you participate in this clinical trial, there's a chance that you'll be placed on a treatment arm where it will actually improve your chances of survival, your chances of better outcomes. And so it's really, I think it comes down to education.
Hmm.
And if you don't take the time to educate patients, then obviously they could be fearful of this new clinical trial of what you have, what have you. I think part of it also is that there is a culture of acceptance of clinical trials when it comes to oncology. In fact, many patients actually compete to get into a clinical trial when it comes to
Yeah.
oncology. But in
Right.
the critical care or the acute care setting, there's not as
Mhm.
much knowledge or as much awareness that these diseases need a lot of research and that you can have improved survival. And so that's part of the issue as well, is that the lack of awareness, the lack of education.
What about on the clinician or physician side? Do we have to convince them too?
Usually, most of the clinicians are very bought into this
Mm.
approach. We deal with a lot of the world leading experts in sepsis or in acute heart failure, and 100% of them believe that this needs to be more personalized. It needs to be more precise. They all believe that this is the future of medicine. Unfortunately, as much as the research that they can do is very important and it contributes to the field, without a company or a set of companies that are actually seeking to develop those types of products, the impact is somewhat limited. So that's where Prenosis comes in. We're really trying to take this concept, which has honestly been around for the last 10 plus years, and but actually make it into a real product that actually makes an impact on patient care.
Let's talk about that. Let's talk about the growth of Prenosis.
Yeah.
What's on your plate for the rest of, let's say, the rest of 26 into 27?
So we're launching an 800 patient trial that seeks to understand which patients would benefit from steroids versus potentially be harmed by steroids. Steroids are currently not FDA approved for use in the hospital setting. I was very surprised when I learned that a few years ago.
Surprising to me
So
too. My doctor often recommends them. I push back on her, but yeah.
yeah, well, clinicians tend to be pretty good at recommending things, but when it comes to steroids, we have a decent amount of data that shows that many patients that are put on steroids actually should not be on steroids. And ultimately, that's because steroids is an immunosuppressant that is designed to treat hyperinflammation. It's designed to treat you when your immune system is elevated, when it's out of control. But clinicians today have no way of telling that a patient's immune system is out of control. So they use surrogates like the patient has trouble breathing or the patient is feeling really sick. And then they prescribe steroids based on that. But that's not fundamentally how steroids work. So we're developing a companion diagnostic to direct the use of steroids to the patients that benefit, basically by identifying very rapidly which patient actually has hyperinflammation, which patient has an elevated immune system, and therefore should be a candidate for steroids. So we're kicking off an 800 patient trial later
Cool.
this year. We're also integrating our platform into some of the top academic medical centers across the United States. Again, that's an effort that's led by Vanderbilt, but it's funded by a $20 million contract that we have with BARDA, a government agency that funds a lot of this type of work.
Uh,
So, in partnership with BARDA and Vanderbilt, we're attempting to get into 20 to 40 of the top academic medical centers across the United States to build a network of sites that we can run our trials on. So the first trial will be the steroids trial, but then after that, we want to include novel drugs. As I mentioned, repurposed drugs that already have a lot of data. They're very mature. We want to add drugs to the catalog. The eventual goal is that every different type of biology that the patient can have when they have these different conditions should have a different drug associated with that. So to treat hyperinflammation, we should have an immunosuppressant drug. To treat immunosuppression, we should have an immune booster drug. To treat coagulation dysfunction, we should have something that treats that. And so for each of these different types of biology, we want to have a toolkit, a set of different drugs that treat all the different types of biology. And if we could do that, we could improve outcomes across sepsis, acute heart failure, stroke, pneumonia, pretty much anything in the hospital setting.
Very cool. Very cool. Hopefully one of those academics will be with somebody here in Atlanta, just in case. I need that.
Yeah, we do work with a couple people in Atlanta.
Good.
So yeah.
Good. Excellent. And Vanderbilt's obviously a good one to work with. They work closely with our company, Fin Partners.
Yeah,
well, Bobby,
they're great set of partners for sure.
Yeah, we're kind of at the end of our time. Thank you so much for shedding light sort of on the hidden complexities of these, what I'll call common, acute, but rapidly developing into, some very, very serious diseases, conditions, and, very dangerous, really, some of these. Your work, thinking about taking each patient's biology to deliver a much more targeted and effective interventions. It's really interesting. I can see it changing outcomes, but also saving lives, which at the end of the day is what all of this health technology is about. So for our listeners, you can connect with Bobby on LinkedIn and learn more about his team's work at Prenosis.com. Bobby, thank you for being on the show.
Thank you so much for your time, and thank you for the opportunity. It was really nice to be here. Appreciate it.
I'll be excited to hear about all the up and coming success stories with that 800-person trial. That's super, super exciting.
Absolutely.
This has been Beth Friedman, Senior Partner at Fin Partners. I thank you for listening to Fin Voices, where we talk about health information, health innovation, and all the technology in between. Until next time, wishing you all the best in health.
Fin Voices is brought to you by Fin Partners, a global marketing and communications agency working across industries and services. Whether inside our walls or on the front lines of health transformation, we stand together to create meaningful and measurable impact for the world around us. Learn more at finpartners.com and follow us on LinkedIn at Fin Partners.